Hello, I'm Debbie Lester, and today I'm going to be talking about flipped learning and flipped classrooms and using project based learning in those classrooms. Flipping your classroom and using project based learning might be a little disorienting at first, but once you familiarize yourself, it can be very beautiful. Flipping a classroom can create a class with students' time spent on activities and applying information, participating, collaborating, and problem solving, rather than just sitting there and listening to a presentation or receiving content. Teachers are free to circulate the room and help students individually answer questions and assess work. Students spend homework time reading or watching instructional content online, which allows them to reread or replay content so they can learn at their own pace. And homework is no longer practicing pages done without the teacher's help, but are short videos with note taking and other interactions with the videos. With students learning at their own pace, they have more time to think, process, and prepare questions for classroom discussions. Flipped learning is a pedagogical approach in which direct instruction moves from the group learning space to the individual learning space. And the resulting group space is transformed into a dynamic, interactive learning environment where the educator guides students as they apply concepts and engage creativity in the subject matter. And this is from Flipped Learning Network. Now, you can flip a classroom without flipped learning. There are four pillars in order for it to be considered flipped learning. You need a flexible environment, a learning culture, intentional content, and professional educator. You need to establish a space and time that permits students to interact and reflect on their learning. Continually observe and monitor students to make adjustments as appropriate, and provide students with different ways to learn content and demonstrate their mastery. You need to give students opportunities to engage in meaningful activities without the teacher being the main conveyor of knowledge. You need to scaffold these activities and make them accessible to all students through differentiation and feedback. We need to prioritize concepts used in direct instruction for learners to access on their own. Create and curate relevant content, and differentiate to make content accessible and relevant to all the students. As professional educators, we make ourselves available to all students for individual, small group, and class feedback in real time as needed. And we conduct ongoing formative assessments during class time through observing and by recording data to inform future instruction. We collaborate and reflect with other educators and take responsibility for transforming our practice. And project-based learning, or PBL, engages students in learning that is deep and long-lasting and inspires them a love of learning and personal connection to their academic experience. PBL is a teaching method in which students gain knowledge and skills by working for an extended period of time to investigate and respond to an authentic, engaging, and complex question, problem, or challenge. This is easier to accomplish in a flipped classroom learning environment. Students develop a deep content knowledge as well as critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, and communication skills, which opens up creativity among teachers and students. So the gold standard for PBL for teachers or for students, the students' project is framed by a meaningful problem to be solved or a question to answer at the appropriate level of challenge. Students engage in a rigorous, extended process of posing questions, finding resources, and applying the information that they've gathered. Their project involves real-world content, tasks and tools, quality standards, or the project speaks to a personal concern, interest, or issue in the students' lives. Students make some of the decisions about the project, including how they work and what they create, and express their own ideas in their own voice. Students and teachers reflect on the students' learning, the effectiveness of their inquiry and project activities, the quality of the students' work, and obstacles that arise and strategies for overcoming them. Students give, receive, and apply feedback to improve their process and products. And finally, students make their project work public by sharing it with and explaining or presenting it to people beyond just the classroom. As teachers, we create or adapt a project for students and our subject areas. We plan the process from launch to completion while allowing for some degree of student voice and choice. Teachers use standards to plan the project and make sure it addresses key knowledge and understanding of from subject areas to be included. Teachers promote student independence and growth, open-ended inquiry, team spirit, and attention to quality. Teachers work with students to organize tasks and schedules, set checkpoints and deadlines, find and use resources, create products, and make them public. Teachers use a variety of lessons, tools, and instructional strategies to support all students in reaching their project goals. Teachers use formative and summative assessments of knowledge, understanding, and success skills, and include self and peer assessment of team and individual work. And finally, teachers engage in learning and creating alongside students and identify when they need skill building, redirection, encouragement, and celebration. So my references I got from Flip Learning Network and project-based learning, PBL Works. And so this is actually John Bergman and Aaron Sams, and they partnered with Edutopia and to create these videos about flipped learning. They're fun and informative videos, and each video presents an important lesson about how to implement the flipped method well.
The flipped class requires us to fundamentally rethink two important aspects of education: space and time.
So let's talk a little bit about space. If you think about the way classrooms have been set up traditionally, they had a chalkboard in the front of the classroom. Then those chalkboards became whiteboards, and then those whiteboards became overhead projectors, which then turned into LCD projectors that we hung on the ceiling. But really the classroom in all of those situations is a presentation station. It's not a center of learning. When we rethink the space of the classroom, we're reorienting how the classroom is used, where the front of the classroom is or where the front of the classroom isn't.
All you have to really do is rethink where you're going to put tables and chairs. But then that begs a very interesting question. Now, what do you do with the extra time you're going to have in a flipped classroom with the kids?
The short answer is we don't know what the best use of your face-to-face class time is, but what we want to encourage you to do is to think about ways you can get your students engaged in some of the higher order thinking, the higher tiers of Bloom's taxonomy, the analysis and application and evaluation and creation components, all within the context of the content that they've already learned before they come to class in better ways with an expert in the room, a content area expert and a learning expert, and that expert is you.
This probably sounds familiar. Project-based learning, PBL, universal design for learning, inquiry learning. These learning pedagogies fit greatly in a flipped learning environment.
In short, a flipped classroom is a way for teachers to transition into the role of facilitator, becoming that guide on the side. We really see the flipped classroom as a transitional tool for educators to move away from being the center of attention in the classroom and move that attention onto students and onto the learning that's happening in those classrooms.
Here are some tips to overcome some of the hurdles and blunders that we've seen commonly happen as teachers flip their classrooms.
Make sure your students can access the content. We all know that not all students have access to the internet at their home, so you may have to come up with some other solutions. Get some flash drives, check them out to students, burn the video content onto DVDs, or write a grant, get a class set of some sort of digital device that you can check out to your students and they can take home and use that way.
Make sure you teach your students how to watch a video. You say, my kids know how to watch a video. Yes, they know how to watch Spider-Man, but that's not the same as watching an educational video that you've created for them to watch. Ultimately, you're trying to teach them how to interact with the video content in a meaningful way that causes them to reflect and think through what they're being exposed to. I had a conversation with a 6th grade teacher, and he said, I spent 3 weeks teaching my students how to watch a video. He had, little guys, 12-year-olds. I had 16-year-olds. It makes a huge difference based on the maturity of the kids and what they are ready and prepared to learn.
Keep in mind that the length of the videos does matter. Our rule of thumb is 1 to 1.5 minutes per grade level that the students are in. So a 4th grade student, you're talking 4 to 6 minutes max. A 10th grade student, 10 to 15 maximum. Keep it short, and if you need to make more videos that are short, that's better than making fewer videos that are long. Another question that a lot of teachers ask is, what do I do if students show up to my class and they haven't viewed the content? Well, let's be real here. I mean, there are kids who are going to show up to any classroom who haven't done their homework. That's just a reality that we live in as educators. It's really not that different in a flipped classroom, but there are ways that you can safeguard or build in some steps to keep kids engaged while they're viewing the content and that you can use to check to see if they have. We took the low-tech approach. We just wanted to see some notes. Other teachers are embedding these videos onto a web page and embedding like a Google form underneath it to collect some data from the students, having them answer some questions. You could just pose a question in the video themselves and have the students bring the answer to that question as an entrance ticket into class. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can check to see if students actually did their work, and then you as a teacher, as an educator, will just hold them accountable for that.
Ultimately, I think the key is that you hold kids accountable. If they've made the poor choice of not doing the work, then what you're going to do is you're going to take that time and you're going to say, you now have to watch the video in class while the other kids are getting help on the hard stuff.
So some teachers get a little intimidated by this idea of creating their own videos. Really, you don't need a super duper studio. You don't need to worry about high dollar cameras and things like that. But there are a few techniques that you can do to really improve the quality of your stuff. So sit in a room with good light, have a nice quiet area to work, and don't have a distracting background. Have it something nice and simple. Those are things that you can introduce to help the quality. Another question you should ask yourself is, do I need it to be perfect, or do I need it on Tuesday? So some teachers can get bogged down and trying to have everything just perfect, but how many of your actual live lessons in a classroom have been perfect? Probably not very many. We teach naturally, we teach organically, and we speak to our students in a way that's meaningful to them. Make these videos the same way. Just make them effective content delivery tools. Don't worry about trying to make a Hollywood production out of it.
One of the beauties of the flipped class is it's very scalable. You know what? You don't have to flip a class. You could flip one lesson, or you could flip a unit, or you could flip a whole class. It's scalable. So one recommendation we would have for you is maybe you need to start small and figure out what's the best place to flip. If I were to give you a recommendation of what you should flip if you're looking for a lesson, find something that your kids struggle with. I was working with a group of 4th grade teachers, and we were talking about math, and they said, in unison to me, they said, my kids struggle with long division. I said, that's your first flipped class video, is long division. So what's the equivalent of long division for you? That's your first lesson to flip.
So to recap, make sure all of your students have access to the content.
Make sure you teach them how to watch the videos.
Build in some safeguards to make sure that all students are actually watching the videos.
Don't feel the need to make your videos perfect.
And don't try to do too much all at once. Take it step by step, take it slow, and before long, you will have flipped your class. So is this for you? Will a flipped classroom work in your subject area and grade level? We think the answer is yes, and here's why. So how do you flip a science class? Take your direct instruction, put that on a video. All that time you get back, labs, labs, labs. Get your kids involved in hands-on learning. In fact, start going down the road of inquiry. Have your students engage in a question and an investigation before you supplement then with some of that video content.
In math class, it's like the biggest no-brainer in the flipped classroom. Kids struggle with math content, so put the problems and how to do that on the video so that when they're in class, they get the help that they need. But don't just solve problems. Make sure you're also bringing in problems and projects that enhance the learning environment for your students.
Can you flip a class like English that isn't real content heavy? The answer is yes. Think about the mechanics of language, the mechanics of grammar, the mechanics of writing. Those are the type of instructional things you could put on a video so that you can get your time back in your class to actually get the students involved in the writing process. You could also use those videos as a remediation tool for students who come to your class without the prerequisite skills.
What about a practical subject like art or woodworking? Well, make a video on techniques and tools the students would use so that in class they can apply those same techniques and tools so that in class the students are making things.
Social studies teachers can leverage video to deliver concept overviews. That way you can get class time back to get students involved in dialogue and reading original documents. That way they're learning more about why things happen in history than just what happened in history.
Can you flip a physical education class? Of course you can. So make a video on how to serve a volleyball so when the kids come to class, they can serve volleyballs. Or how to play a particular game so that when they come to class, they can play the game. This frees up class time for teachers who are bogged down with too much explanation and rule giving.
What about students who learn at a pace that's different than the pace that the teacher is teaching? They could be a student who learns very, very quickly or a student who might learn a little more slowly. Well, having a flipped classroom in place gives the students control over the pace in which they're exposed to content.
A student can watch a video at double speed and hear the content faster.
Or a student can also pause and rewind if they need to hear content slower or multiple times.
The common thread in all of these examples is that lower level skill and concept stuff is done on the video so that the in-class time is used for higher order thinking, deeper learning, and more engagement.
Adopting a flipped classroom model requires creating a new culture of learning. And like anything that disrupts the status quo, that change takes some time.
Here are some strategies to engage key stakeholders, including students, administrators, and parents.
So I once had a student say to me, "Mr. Sams, you just like this flipped classroom model because the students are doing all the work in class." And I said, yes, that's exactly why I like it. I want my students to be the most engaged participants in the learning process. I want their minds active. So if you start hearing from your students that this is hard and it's unlike anything I've ever experienced, that's a good sign. That's a sign that they're engaged and you're transferring that ownership to the students.
With those students, if you stick with it, they will learn to take more ownership for their learning.
A lot of teachers are often surprised that their administrators are excited about flipped classrooms already. They've read the articles, they've seen the emerging research indicating that flipped classrooms are a viable teaching strategy.
But if you have administrators who are a little hesitant about bringing a flipped classroom model into the school, then we have a couple of strategies that you could employ as you bring them into the conversation.
In fact, open and honest conversation is one of the great starting points with your administrators. Talk to them about how this will increase the student engagement in your classroom and be very communicative about some of the changes that you'll be making in your classroom as you start to adopt this.
Or just simply take them to a flipped class. There's nothing like seeing the flipped classroom in action. Parents generally love the flipped classroom model for two reasons. Number one, their student gets more individual attention from their teacher. Number two, the parent doesn't have to be the content expert at home anymore. That role stays with the teacher.
However, if you find yourself in a situation where some parents are reluctant to adopt an instructional model that's different than the one they grew up with, you could try teaching them about a flipped classroom using a flipped classroom approach. You could make a video for your back-to-school night or curriculum night or your open house in which you explain how the class works, and then the parents could view that ahead of time and bring questions to ask you when they show up.
What better way to teach parents about the flipped classroom model than to flip the back-to-school night?
So let's recap. Your students will probably love this, but if you get any resistance, remember that transferring the ownership of the learning to the students is worth it for them in the long run.
And if your administrators are hesitant, take them on a visit so they can see the flipped classroom in action.
And for your parents, teach them about the flipped classroom using the flipped classroom approach.
Remember, transforming a culture of learning takes time and support from everybody involved.